It's another crossover event, this time with the Guilty as Charged podcast. We're going to talk about Jim Harbaugh, the free agency, the offseason, and the draft that's coming up here in just 3 short weeks.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
On everybody, welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I am your host, David Drogemeyer. I am only here riding solo today because the new father, Daniel Wade, is spending some time with his new baby girl, Dylan, and of course, his beautiful wife, Karina, celebrating their first child together. But I want to say thank you to the everydayers for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Chargers podcast. You know, you can check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. Of course, follow and subscribe on YouTube so you never miss special crossover episodes like this. But before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200. If your bet wins, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, without any further ado, here they are, the Guilty as Charged podcast. All right, guys, here they are, the guests of the hour. Of course, I am joined by the Guilty as Charged podcast here with Tyler Schoon. You can find him on Twitter at Tyler J. Schoon. And, of course, his partner in crime, Stephen Hagland. You can find him on Twitter at Stephen I. Hagland. And, of course, follow their show, Guilty as Charged, on Twitter as well, at GAC Pod 17. Fellas, thank you so much for taking some time to jump on here, talk some Chargers football. A lot going on, a lot of different moving parts. How is everything going for you guys?
Things are going very well. It's nice to have the season behind us. That was a dreadful, awful season.
Yeah, it was.
Things are looking up with Jim Harbaugh, and so I'm feeling good.
Good. Steven, how's everything going for you, man?
Things are going well. Tyler and I both work in education. This week is spring break for us, so we're really excited. Grinding some more draft film. I went golfing today, so cannot complain. Life is pretty good over here.
My goodness, I would love to get out there and get some golfing. All right, let's go ahead and jump right into this thing here. Tyler, we'll go ahead and start with you. One of the things I don't think we've seen a lot of or even enough of the last few years is just player development. I think that's something that's really been lacking. I think you see that more specifically when you look at the offensive line. For me, I feel like that's a pretty clear indication. Do you think that with Jim Harbaugh and his new coaching staff, that's going to change in a positive way?
Yeah, I think it has to. And I think the offensive line is exactly what I was thinking of before you mentioned the offensive line. In terms of development, you look at someone like Zion Johnson, the film was there, the RAS was there, the Senior Bowl stuff was there. He's a smart guy. Like, everything was there to be this elite guard, and it just has not materialized for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's, Corey Linsley not being there, changing offensive schemes, changing a position, etc. But like, he has all the potential. And now someone like, Ben Herbert, Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, the trenches are going to be so much better. So I think offensive line in particular is going to develop more than we've seen in quite some time. So really, I've worked since Frank Smith.
Yeah, I mean, and also, Stephen, I think that development also goes to coaches as well. I think Jim Harbaugh is probably known as one of the better developer of coaches as well as talent on the football field as far as the players is concerned. So maybe we can see some of this Jim Harbaugh coaching tree, kind of spread its roots and get out into the league like we see some of the other great coaches in the NFL.
Yeah, I think you've seen that track record, particularly at Michigan, right, where Jim has been able to, cycle through different coordinators and take chances on different coordinators. And, Sharon Moore, I think, is obviously the most recent example. He was an offensive line tight end coach. Like, that's not typically like a guy who becomes a play caller in college football. Usually it's a former quarterbacks coach or a former like wide receiver coach. So he's been able to do that and been able to, withstand the kind of coaching attrition, if you will, throughout his tenure at Michigan. I think it's empowering the other people. Like, for better or worse, Brandon Staley, fell and died on the play calling sword, right? But what could have been if Derek Ansley was calling plays? That's a guy who did have a lot of fans around the league, and he was mentioned in a lot of like up and coming, coaching lists that I would see every single offseason. And then he's not really able to spread his wings very much because Brandon was so strict on calling plays. And I understand why like that decision was made, but Jim is able to say, hey, look, like you have this specific skill set. That's great. You're great at your job, but let's let you take a next step here and let's let you become an offensive coordinator, be a defensive coordinator. Jesse Minter was not like this, like amazing, like well sought after defensive coach. He was the defensive coordinator at Vanderbilt before he was the defensive coordinator at Michigan. And so
he
has
had no
that
idea
eye
who
for
he
talent.
was, right?
Yeah. He has that eye for talent. And then he's also willing to say, hey, like, I'm going to let you take that next step here. And then obviously it has panned out for him very well at Michigan and previously as well.
Yeah, it certainly has for sure. And just kind of going back to the player development thing here, with this new coaching staff, with Jim Harbaugh, what is a player on both sides of the ball, offense and defense, you think is going to benefit the most from this new coaching staff? This one's for both of you guys.
Yeah, so I'll start with offense. I said Zion Johnson, so I'll go with Josh Palmer next. He's a player that has already begun his development anyway. Like he's someone who has ascended and started to develop every single year. But I think with the health and the conditioning and the program that keeps him healthy and on the field, I think he's a guy, especially if he ends up being wide receiver 2, currently at least maybe wide receiver 1 in the offense before the draft.
I'd say so right now.
Yeah, like he could push over 1,000, no problem. And he was on pace to do that. Just the injuries are so unfortunate with him. But with the right play calling, with this kind of fit, I think that really works there. And then I'll take the easy one on defense. Like I think Derwin James, is there a step forward he really needs to take? Not necessarily, but it's more just a return to form.
Yeah.
Even Minter came out and said, you can spend too much time imagining what Derwin James can do, and not enough time imagining and figuring out what he actually like is really good at, and just focusing on those 1 to 2 things. So kind of a low key shot at Staley, trying to do 10 different things with him and being okay at them. Whereas Derwin James, like just getting back to the 2 things. Like, look, Gus Bradley, for all his faults, they did like 1 thing the entire time.
That
was the best version of Derwin James we saw, right? It was his rookie season.
Yeah.
And anytime he was healthy with Gus Bradley. So I just think that return to form is expected at this point because he's an outstanding player.
Yeah, I think for me, I'll start defense. I think Tuli Tuipulotu is the choice here for me. And obviously he's, a guy who flashed a ton as a rookie. But he's so young, and edge rusher can be kind of volatile if you're not drafting like a bona fide top 15 pick. And so the Chargers, I think, did right by him by bringing both Khalil and Joey back. So he's able to continue to learn without the pressure of having to be the guy.
Yeah.
Like I think Tuli flashed so many good things, and he was one of the best run defending edge rushers in the league last year.
Which was really surprising for me. I mean, I think that was great to see.
Yeah, as a rookie, extremely difficult to do that. USC had him playing like nose tackle sometimes. Like it was not a super clean evaluation by any means.
Yeah.
And so he came in and was dominant as a rookie. But I love the way that they're not going to have to force him to be the guy. Like hypothetically, if they had decided to trade Khalil and Joey's the guy that they keep, and then Joey gets injured, now Tuli is your edge 1. He's the guy who's getting double teamed consistently. It just puts a lot of unnecessary pressure on him. Now he can kind of continue to be that 3rd role player, 2nd edge rusher in a pinch. And then next year he can be the guy and take that jump forward. And physically, I think there are some kind of comparisons to Aiden Hutchinson, who obviously played for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Offensively, Josh Palmer, I think, is my answer there as well. But for sake of argument, I mean, it's hard to say, like, we all know how good Rashawn Slater is, but the league and the fans around the league have kind of forgotten which is crazy. Yeah. And the guy played through 2 high ankle sprains last year, as Duke Manyweather likes to remind people every couple of weeks. But this is a guy who at his best, I think, could be the best left tackle in the league post Trent Williams. And I think Jim Harbaugh, Ben Herbert are going to have a ton of fun working with Sean in the weight room, as we've seen him just put up, freak numbers athletically in the gym, things like that. So I think we see Rashawn be able to stay healthy this year and get back to that, all pro status in his 4th season, which is kind of crazy to me that it's been that fast already. But obviously the shining jewel of the Brandon Staley draft pick era.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, also, like, that's one of the easiest picks in the world. You have Rashawn Slater on the board when the Chargers were ready to pick. That was one of those no-brainer type of situations.
100%.
But it definitely worked out, and I agree with you 100%. Rashawn Slater is one of the most dominant left tackles in the NFL when he is right, when he is healthy. There's very few people in the league that are better, in my opinion. All right, we're going to get into more with the Guilty as Charged podcast with Tyler and Steven talking about the draft, talking about the offseason, some of the surprises, and we're going to get into all of that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. It can be easy to ignore our social battery and spread ourselves thin, especially with social gatherings picking up after the winter. What's the right amount of socializing for you, and how do you recharge? Maybe you thrive around people, or maybe you need some more alone time. Therapy can give you the self-awareness to build a social life that doesn't drain your battery. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so that you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Going here to the free agency of it all, the craziness that is all unfolded. I think we have to touch on it. We'll do it briefly because I'm sure we've all talked about it on our shows ad nauseum. But it's the Keenan Allen and the Mike Williams and all of the moves that were made. We'll start with Keenan and Mike so far. Anything surprised you there as far as how that happened, how that went down? I think for me, I definitely expected Keenan to be a Charger for life. Still felt like he had several productive seasons still left with the way that he plays the game. Doesn't really rely on speed, more of a route technician with the releases and the intimate knowledge of the defense. Still thought he could be a good player for the Chargers, but I guess the Chargers at that current number was just not going to be ready to play ball.
I think me personally, I maybe underestimated just how much Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz would want to come in and have 2025 be kind of like, all right, we're going to have all of our guys come in here. Like, I always just pictured Keenan is, of the big four, Keenan was the easiest to kind of project past 2024, like you said. And so
agreed.
In my head, I was always like, his game has aged well. It will continue to age well. He's Justin's guy. Like, he's going to be around long term. He's the easiest one to justify an extension with. And so in my head, I was always like, this makes the most sense. But like I mentioned, I think Jim and Joe just wanted to be able to come in here and say, we have Justin, we have Rashawn, we have Thule, we have Derwin. Outside of that, like, maybe we just need like a whole core makeover past 2024. And I think I maybe, underestimated that because, like you said, I definitely thought Keenan was going to be around long term. So definitely was very surprised at the trade. Not very surprised at Mike Williams getting cut. Unfortunately, that was kind of the easiest one to predict.
Yeah. Mike Williams being cut was the one we were like, okay, that was the one thing we were definitely going to do. What surprised me about the Keenan Allen trade was the timing and then them keeping Joey Bosa. So Keenan Allen being traded or released or whatever before free agency. Okay. Like, I kind of could have seen that in a vacuum. Somebody had to go. Probably two guys had to go. But I was definitely surprised it was Keenan Allen. I was definitely surprised so late. Although I believe Jim Harbaugh, Joe Ortiz, they talked about leverage and having to wait as long as possible to try to maximize that leverage. But I did not expect them to move on from Keenan Allen and keep Joey Bosa. That's two things that I did not expect to go at the exact same time. So that was definitely a surprise for me. But overall, we've all talked about it. I disagree with the move. I don't feel like it was the right time to do it. I don't as much mind about the draft compensation. Like, fine, 4th round this year, great, whatever. I just am surprised they did it this year. And I feel like, as Steven said, with him being Justin Herbert's guy, they'd hold on to him for even another year, see how it goes, see if your program works. Because to me, like, especially with the way Jim talked about him, it was such a Harbaugh guy. Like, he was the star. He was awestruck by Keenan Allen. And then 2-3 weeks later, they traded him. So it was a surprise. And I went through the emotions, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess it was just strictly a business decision. I think one of the other decisions, I guess a pair of decisions that really surprised me was that not only were the Chargers able to keep Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, but they both agreed to pay cuts. I mean, when was the last time that you remember anybody taking a pay cut to stay with the Chargers? Did that surprise you? And do you think that's more of the Jim Harbaugh effect?
It did surprise me. I think Khalil deserved everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. He was incredible.
So him taking that pay cut, in terms of his character, it does not surprise me. Khalil Mack will sacrifice everything to make sure the team is as good as it can possibly get. So I guess that doesn't surprise me, but still, he deserved all of it. Joey, I am surprised he was on the team overall.
Yeah.
But with that said, like, what do? Do you take the pay cut that still can work into different bonuses and give you a ton of money, or do you get released and then go take a cheap deal and do this kind of 1 year Jadeveon Clowney thing? I think it was better for Joey overall to stay with the Chargers and take that deal and work with Jim Harbaugh, work with Ben Herbert. So but still, I am surprised, and I do think we're going to see some of this moving forward with Jim Harbaugh. This idea that some guys will, take a little bit less, take that pay cut, make things work because they want to be here. I am surprised though that happened in year one.
Yeah, I think with Joey, like the thing that surprises me most is that Jim came out and said he thought Joey was having a better season than Khalil. Because Khalil was like, if the Chargers were a better team, like if they were a bona fide playoff team, Khalil would have been in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation.
Oh, without a doubt. I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
You look at his numbers matched up against the Defensive Player of the Years, and his are better almost across the board.
Yeah. Even if you take out the 6-sack Raider game, which is still crazy, like his per play stats were right up there with TJ Watt, Myles Garrett, everybody. And then he was also like one of the best run defending edge rushers in the league, which was so much fun to watch every single week on tape. But I was, if Joey was going to stay on the roster, I kind of figured it would be a pay cut. Khalil taking a pay cut, he had no reason to do that. Like he was a guy who just came off 17 sacks, Defensive Player of the Year consideration. So I think it, like Tyler's mentioned, it speaks to the Harbaugh effect, and it speaks to, I think, both of them kind of understanding where they're at in the league, where even when you take a pay cut with the Chargers, that's still probably more money than you could get on the open market. And you can kind of control your situation. They both love living in Southern California. I mean, who wouldn't? Yeah. Get the new training facility, new training staff, new head coach. So you can kind of reassess where you're at individually. I think it makes sense for both of them. But like Tyler mentioned, I did not expect Joey to be on the roster this year. I really thought that they were going to try and move on and keep Khalil, keep Keenan. And that was kind of my vision for the team. And obviously Jim Harbaugh had a different one.
Well, I know one guy that's really happy about those moves, and that guy is defensive coordinator Jesse Minter. I'm sure he is ecstatic to have two premier edge rushers to be able to spearhead the first year of his defense at the NFL level. Let's go ahead and switch gears a little bit more towards the moves that have been made so far in free agency. And I'll start here with Steven here. This year's free agency feels a lot different for the Chargers. I mean, it's a lot of 1 year prove it deals. What have you made of the signings that the Chargers have made so far?
Yeah, I like all of the signings because I think the approach was to fill as many needs as they possibly could. And the needs are very clearly identified. They needed a blocking tight end. They needed a big physical running back. They needed an outside cornerback. Maybe you can not love the players, but they're able to get these guys all under contract at a certain value. I mean, Bradley Bozeman, he's not like an amazing center, but he's a starting caliber center, and they signed him for the vet minimum. Again, kind of speaking to the Harbaugh effect there. A guy like him, potentially could have signed for, much more money elsewhere. Same thing with Christian Fulton being able to sign for $3 million, that kind of talent. Maybe he's able to sign elsewhere. So I like all the players. I'm not going to sit here and say like they're all like amazing Pro Bowl caliber players, but the mission was pretty clear to me where they just needed to fill as many roles as possible. And they've signed 8 players, which is generally a lot before the draft. And I think, they got them all at pretty good value. So the additions that the Chargers have made, I don't have a problem with. It's just obviously the Keenan Allen thing.
Yeah, no, it was a really good start to free agency, and they did the best with what they were given by Tom Telesco in the previous regime. Chargers free agencies of the past, it's like getting a brand new car, beautiful new sports car. Maybe it's a classic. Let's say it was 73 Datsun 240Z. That was my first car. And you get it, and it's cherry, it's beautiful, it's painted. Wow, this looks really nice. You look at the engine, hey, it's pretty good. Then you go out and take it to the racetrack, you floor it. Oh, it runs pretty well. And then you try to slow down before you get to the turns, and you have no brakes, and you crash on the wall and die a fiery death.
Wow.
That basically feels like
that went dark.
Yeah, well, no, I survived.
I mean, that's pretty much what the Chargers did last season.
Well, and basically they always present. I feel like the Chargers and Telesco always presented this really like, here's the big name we got.
Yeah,
here's maybe 2 big names that we
got.
No question. Yeah. And then well, what about the rest of the roster? What about the other parts? And so, yeah, the Chargers didn't go outside and get a Corey Linsley or a JC Jackson or Khalil Mack this time around. A, they couldn't really, but B, they've done a really good job of just building out this roster. I mean, when Steven and I, and you guys, I'm sure, first started looking at the depth chart of this team, it was like, oh, we need 20 players. Like, we need everybody. Like, we don't care.
It's like, what do they not need? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Quarterback. And that's basically it. Otherwise,
Right.
everything else was a need. And even some positions that are pretty strong for the Chargers, they need depth there, or they need to prepare for injuries.
Yeah.
So I think them going out and getting some of these guys, again, no flashing names. No one's going to say, oh, the Chargers won the offseason this time, but good. Like, the Chargers went out and got a good set of players to start things off and to really prepare themselves ahead of the draft. They addressed a lot of needs that are weak positions in the draft, perception-wise.
Yeah.
So I think just going into the draft going, okay, we can take corner, we can take receiver, we can take D tackle, maybe offensive tackle in the draft at great spots in the draft. You're feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah, real quick before, sorry to cut you off there, David.
No, you're good.
DaCosta was speaking, the Ravens GM. I don't know where he was speaking. I don't know if you guys saw the clips or not, but one of the things that he was speaking about that I think we'll see the Chargers employ this same kind of philosophy is that they really believe that the draft is where you find your core, and then free agency is where you supplement the roles. And under Tom Telesco is kind of the opposite. You know, we're going to go sign the expensive players, go sign the new shiny toys, and they're going to be our core. And if we hit on players in the draft, great. And it was always kind of backwards because Tom Telesco would always say, like, we're a draft and develop team, and then he lets all the guys walk in free agency. You know, the Ravens have never really been that way. They'll sign a big name every once in a while, Marcus Williams and free agency kind of thing. But for the most part, their free agency stuff is little cheap signings here and there. You know, a post-draft signing like a Jadeveon Clowney, Calvin Hoy type. They're generally not like big spenders in free agency. Next year, the Chargers are going to have a ton of cap space, so we'll see how that goes. But, you know, the Ravens' philosophy generally has been the draft is our core and free agency is the role players. And so I think it's going to be a change for us as Chargers fans to, like, kind of not, you know, be active on day one in free agency as they have been in the past.
Which is not a bad thing, because maybe that's going to turn into better quality depth just across the board year after year, or year over year, which I think we can all agree is something that the Chargers have desperately lacked over the last several seasons. Well, we're going to get into all of the possible scenarios at the 5th overall pick with Tyler and Steven, and we are going to do that right after this. But first, I got to tell you about FanDuel. Right now is one of the best times of the season to be betting on sports with the giant college basketball tournament, the NBA and the NHL heading towards the playoffs, and baseball now in full swing, and the best place to place your bets is on FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. That means if you place $5 on a giant favorite on the money line, you get $200 in bonus bets if they win. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Obviously, it is draft month, fellas. It is here. We are only a few short weeks away from figuring out and finding out what is going to happen with the 5th overall pick. So that kind of makes me want to go through a couple of possible scenarios here. So I am going to start with this one here. Let's go ahead and start with Tyler here. It's official. So if 3 quarterbacks go 1 through 3 and the Cardinals take Marvin Harrison Jr., what are you doing with the 5th overall pick?
I would have maybe said differently prior to the Keenan Allen trade, but because they've traded Keenan Allen and moved on from Mike Williams, I'm taking LSU wide receiver Malik Neighbors at 5. I've watched him now. Of course, I've watched him to grade him, but I've also watched him by watching other players, other defenders. And it's like something. There goes Malik Neighbors doing something incredible and special. And to
Neighbors
me, like, right, he is at minimum the 3rd best receiver that I've watched and graded over the last 4 years, obviously with Marvin Harrison Jr. And then I think Jamar Chase is 2nd, and then Malik Neighbors. And that's a really special tier to be a part of, in my opinion. Like, he is just everything about modern offense. He's young, he's productive. The RAS checks out, this per play stats check out. He's #1 in yards per route run in this class that tends to do really well. Obviously last year it was holy cow, what's his name? the guy from BYU, Steven.
Puka Nacua.
Puka Nacua, thank you. He was number 1 in yards per route run last year. It's been Devonta Smith before that. Like, that tends to track well with guys doing well in the NFL. So Malik Neighbors, I think, fits what they want, what they need. I'm taking Malik Neighbors at 5, especially post Keenan Allen trade.
Steven, same thing for you?
If Marvin Harrison Jr. goes 4, I'm trading down. I agree with the.
And who are you going to trade with? What's the most likely partner there?
So I think unless they trade up to 3, that's the Vikings. I know fans will hate it, but they could also trade down with the Broncos or the Raiders, and then they would get first-round picks in the next 3 drafts from one of those teams.
Yeah,
so,
you got to fleece them, right?
Yeah, 100%. But like that's the comp, right? You know, the 49ers moved up from 12 to 3 and gave up obviously that year's first-round pick and then first-round picks for the next 2 years. So you can be fine if they trade up for JJ McCarthy. I think that you can survive with the future first-round picks, but I just think this team has too many other needs. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best wide receiver prospect I've studied since 2019. I do think he's that special. Malik Neighbors is not far behind, to be fair. I just think that once you pass Marvin Harrison Jr., I think you take the haul because of where the team is at. And I think it kind of lines up with the free agency philosophy where they just have a ton of needs and you trade down. You go get, if it's the Vikings, you get 11 and 23. So it's like, would you rather have, J.C. Latham, Taron Arnold type at 11, maybe Brian Thomas Jr., the other LSU wide receiver, and then you can get like a Jackson Powers Johnson, a Kool-Aid McKinstry at 23. So it's just kind of like, would you rather have the 2 or the 1? I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is good enough to justify the 1, but outside of him, I think you trade down, in my opinion.
So is that the answer? If 4 QBs go and you're on the clock at 5 and Marvin Harrison Jr. is available, or is it the consensus that you take Marvin?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you sprint to the podium as fast as you can.
Good. Yeah. I think we're all in agreement on that as well. Daniel's not here, but he's saying the same exact thing in spirit. So I think as far as position groups past, the first or second rounds, what are some positions that absolutely have to be addressed in this year's draft class? Steven, go ahead.
I think we did an episode on the Chargers feed about non-negotiables, and drafting the center of the future was one of them. And it lines up because I love this center class. You have Jackson Powers Johnson, who I talked about, who there's like potentially some medical concerns there. You have Graham Barton from Duke, who could play center, although I think he could probably play tackle as well for whoever he is played. Then you have Zach Frazier, who's a great center prospect. I love Hunter Norzad from Penn State. You have Cedric Van Pan from Georgia. You have Tanner Bortolini from Wisconsin. This center class is stacked. Like usually you have like one good center prospect and then it's like a day 3 flyer. This year there's like 5 or 6 guys that I really, really like from a center position standpoint. And the Chargers could take one in the 2nd round, 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round. And I feel like comfortable that they can find the center of the future. So that's definitely a need, and it lines up with how good the draft class is as well.
Tyler, quickly, go ahead.
Okay, corner for me. I think offensive line, of course, is a very solid option there. Interior offensive line, very good. You can find one guy in each part of each round. You can find 3 guys at corner in every single round, it feels like. Going from day 2 to day 3, there are so many elite players and prospects in this class. I'm starting to get to the point where I feel like this corner class is as good as a wide receiver class. I love these corners. There's a flavor for everything that you need. Guys that hit, guys that are fast, guys that are tall, you name it. The Chargers could literally revamp their entire secondary with 2-3 picks in this class.
I love it. And I definitely feel like getting a corner and getting a good one, especially early on in the draft, I think is very important. We see how much money those guys make, at the top of the market, right? I mean, it's really, really important that they grab and they get talent and then they infuse some good young talent into that cornerback room because it's very shallow when you look at it right now. But guys, thank you so much for giving me so much of your time tonight. Really appreciate you guys. Obviously, make sure and follow Tyler and Mr. Steven on X and, of course, the Guilty as Charged podcast. They are cranking out content all year long. Guys, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and congrats to the Wade family. Hope baby is safe and sound, healthy, wife as well. So appreciate you guys for having us, and shout out to the Wade family growing.
All right, guys, that is going to wrap things up for today's Locked On Chargers podcast. I hope you enjoyed the interview with the Guilty as Charged podcast. Want to give a huge shout out again to Tyler and Steven for giving me some time today to talk Chargers football. It was a blast, but that's going to do it. So for more on the Locked On Chargers podcast, please check out the Locked On Chargers podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. Please like and subscribe. We really would appreciate it. Leave us a good 5-star review anywhere you listen to your podcast. We'd really appreciate that. Of course, like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Follow us anywhere you like on our social pages. We're on Twitter, on at Locked On LAC. You can find me on Twitter at DroTalkSD. You can find my partner on Twitter, Daniel Wade, at Dan Talk Sports. And make sure and follow us and like us on our Facebook page and our Instagram, Locked On Chargers as well. But that's going to do it. We will be back with you here very shortly. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.